Hey everyone and welcome to Storytime. My name is Jake and today we are going to be looking at the subreddit r/prorevenge, where people tell us their best stories on how they got revenge on someone they didn't like. If you're new around here, please do hit subscribe down below so that you never miss out on another video. But for now, let's sit back, relax and enjoy some pro-revenge. Bully Landlord gets it in the end. My first husband was not a very nice man. For 6 years, I was belittled and basically a baby factory for him. He was a fantastic father, but a horrible husband. After he finally got his heirs, I was then treated even worse until I finally woke up and decided to leave him. This revenge story is not about him. I just had to set the scene. I moved out from the house, taking just my clothes, the car, 4,000 value, no more, and the computer. I had nothing. Stayed at a good friend's for a couple of weeks before I was able to line up a crappy townhouse with roommates. I had nothing, and my bed was a cat pee smelling free couch I was able to score. I wound up having 3 to 4 jobs, with one of them being full time, and once a week I would not even be able to sleep at night between jobs, meaning having to stay up for almost 48 hours. Now, fast forward 1 year, my divorce was finalised and I had fulfilled my year's lease for the townhouse. By this time, I was able to furnish the home and my bedroom and my kids' room when they would be with me for visitation. The scumbag landlord, we will just call him SBL, was a nice-ish landlord during the time of my tenancy, and I was a good tenant, never being late with my rent. Although I had roommates, I was the sole name on the lease. The landlord would show up often, with some guys that he had to work on something like plumbing tests or whatever excuse he could come up with just so he could be all creepy and hang around trying to converse with me with mild sexual undertones that made me quite uneasy at times. Finally, the lease was fulfilled and I was now onto a month-to-month contract to which at the time I was ready to move out of this crappy townhouse and find a great house in the mountains nearby. And I was simply thrilled now that I got my feet on the ground and can afford a bit better than slum living. My lease stated that I had to give 1 month's notice in order to move out. Unfortunately, I was able to get the house I was to move into for the next month only 3 weeks away. I sent an email to the landlord stating that I intended on moving out at the end of this month, in 3 weeks, and he can try to find another tenant. But I did state that if he didn't find a tenant, I would still fulfill my legal obligation and pay next month's rent. Within 1 week, 2 weeks before I was to move out, he emailed back and stated that I was very generous of my offer, but he was able to find a new tenant for the beginning of next month, and I would be off the hook. He even tipped his hand by stating that he already collected a deposit from them. Now, something happened within a couple of days after that, which was no fault of my own, nor my roommates. The townhouse came with its own appliances, fridge, oven, etc., including a clothes washer and dryer on the main level. My roommate had put a load of laundry in and went to the living room to have a nap. He awoke to find that the washer had malfunctioned with the sensory switch, which had never stopped the water fill stage. And there was an inch of water in the kitchen and living room. He splashed through the water to turn off the washer and called me to come help deal with this. I was just getting off work and I whipped home to assess the damage. It was bad. There was standing water on top of the living room carpet and a good inch of water in the whole kitchen. I called the landlord and told him the issue. By the time the landlord showed up, I had already gotten most of the standing water out with the help of my roommate and friends that showed up with shop vacs. The landlord didn't seem too upset, which was surprising for me, and had an appliance repairman had come to look at the washer. The repairman said, "Yep, here's the culprit," and showed how the dial would stick on the fill stage and wouldn't click over to the agitate stage. After replacing the dial and lubricating the whole deal, he left. The next week was chaos, as I was busy trying to pack, and the landlord had insurance guys in assessing, and workers taking out the carpet and cutting 2 feet worth of the lower drywall on the whole main level. The day of the move, though I was still supposed to be there for a couple more days, the landlord had let himself in as movers were moving my stuff with a camera going around taking pictures of everything. I honestly thought that it was for his insurance claims, etc. I actually felt bad for the landlord, I'm too nice, and told him that I would not ask for any of my deposit back. and he responded in front of the loading crew and my roommate, "Thank you, that's very generous of you." We parted ways, and I thought that was that. I was wrong. 2 weeks into my new home location, did the landlord showing up on my doorstep with a summons to appear in arbitration because he was suing me. What? On what grounds? He stated it's all in this paperwork and handed me a manila envelope with 18 pages of everything he was charging me with, all including photos. Now I know why he was going around taking pics. Nickel and diming me on everything from a bent ventilation blind, that was like that when I had moved in, and some scuffs on walls, etc, etc. But then he also wanted me to pay his insurance deductible, and that following month's rent. He claimed that the tenants that he had lined up backed out at the last minute, claiming that they didn't think the place wouldn't be ready in time with the new drywall and paint, and so on. So he still wanted me to pay for that month's rent. Really? I knew I was more than generous of giving him my whole deposit, and then for him to come back and sue me for thousands? He was not only claiming the damages caused by the flood, but improvements he needed to do that should never be or have been my responsibility in the first place. Even cracks in the living room wall that was from the building settling. How should I be responsible for that? Even new lighting, faucets, etc. All mainly on the accusation that I was negligent. I wasn't going to have that. I know it was a slummy townhouse complex and most of his tenants were just welfare cases. And maybe he could get away with this with the others, but not me. No way. I had just got out of marriage and that made me feel insignificant and had horrible self-esteem. But now I had my dignity and felt strong for the first time in a long time. No way was I going to let any more stuff happen to me without doing something about it. I had 10 days before the date of my arbitration meeting. I immediately got to work. First, getting a signed deposition from the very repairman that had showed that day stating that the appliance was quite in need of maintenance work and the last time he had done any maintenance for him was almost 5 years before. From thoroughly reviewing my rental contract and local laws, the landlord is obligated to have all appliances maintained/serviced every year. I had also talked to some of the other tenants and had heard that this wasn't the first time the landlord had sued tenants after the fact. I hunted them down and got sworn statements from them also. Unfortunately for them, they didn't know what to do and mostly didn't show up at arbitration, hence the landlord winning by default. No way I was going to let him do this to me. I then drew up a rebuttal to each and every claim he had, including photos from the year that I had lived there, printed out all my email correspondence, and even convinced my ex's roommate and one of the movers that heard my interaction with the landlord about him stating how generous it was of me, letting him keep my whole deposit, which was a significant amount, to come. Day of arbitration. I dressed up in my power suit, and with my ex-roommate and worker in tow, showed up at the meeting. Now, in Canada, arbitration is not held in a courtroom per se, but is still held at the courthouse in a conference room with a judge. We had 1 hour with this judge. Since the landlord was the plaintiff, he got to go first with his case. He spent over 40 minutes going over everything and I sat quietly until he finished. Once he finished, I then hauled out the rebuttal in multiple copies, handed to the judge, to the landlord, and anyone else that wished to have one, and I quickly went over each point. The landlord was irate and interrupted almost every second sentence I spoke. I would pause the moment he would start talking and say sweetly, "I was quiet and polite during your time to present your case. I hope you grant me the same respect." The landlord started to get red in the face, especially when I got to the deposition of the maintenance worker for the appliance. I included with that the Tenancy/Landlord Act sections pertaining to appliance maintenance and stated that this was the only record of maintenance that had occurred, and unless he can come up with more recent records from perhaps another company, it was over 5 years since anything had been looked at. With my defense, I had also then countered that I would like my deposit back and my day's pay from work since I had to take that day off to go to this meeting. The judge then made his statement, and I will always remember this for the rest of my life. He stated that first, He was very impressed of my presentation and that I obviously had a good handle on things and can tell that my nature is of kindness and respect, especially with photos of how I had the townhouse furnished and clean and pride in whatever home I would live in. Bottom line, not only did I win my case, I wound up having the landlord owing my over 80% of my deposit back, including interest. The landlord's face was priceless. The judge then proceeded to tell the landlord that they will be reviewing again all his previous filings, and if there was enough evidence of harassment, he would be reported to the Board of Landlords and Tenants. I don't really know if anything came out of that. Now, I walked away that day feeling on top of the world, completely justified, and he got a taste of his own medicine. But it didn't stop there. Oh no! Knowing that this guy has a history of suing tenants, I printed up my final results, and judge's signature, and gave a copy to each and every tenant in that complex. I wanted to warn everyone his practices and to keep notes, photos, etc., so that he couldn't do that to them. But I didn't stop there. He still now owed me money. And I asked repeatedly for the payment. He never responded. He had until a certain day to pay me back my deposit, and on that day I had gone to his house. I looked up his residence under public records, and he is a landlord and had to file under a certain address, and knocked on the door. He didn't answer, though I knew he was home. I rang the bell a few more times and knocked loudly. He then turned his house alarm on, which at first startled me, but quickly turned to humour seeing how much of a coward this bully turned out to be. I then yelled out loud enough that I am not going anywhere. He yelled out, "Get off my property or I will call the police." Okay, no problem. I got off the property, but camped out on the front sidewalk. I had a fold-up chair, a cooler with water and sodas, a few sandwiches, and all my paperwork with me. I was set to stay there forever. I then would tell anyone that would walk by, already there were some people there from the house alarm fiasco, about how I was a tenant and he wrongfully sued me and that I have a claim against him and now he owes me money. I let anyone look at the paperwork just to back up my claim. The police did show up. They first went to talk to the landlord and he was claiming that I was harassing him, slandering him, and wouldn't leave his property. I was on public property, the sidewalk, and it isn't slander if it's true, of which I had all my court-signed paperwork to back me up. I wasn't disturbing the peace, I was simply and quietly seated outside his home and just talking to neighbours about his actions. He was out yelling that I needed to leave, and I quietly stated that I would be happy to leave once I am paid that he was legally obligated to do by that date. I was not going to leave before I got my money in my hand, and I was more than willing to stay there and tell anyone that would listen to me why I was camped out. The police stated that I wasn't doing anything wrong, that it's public property. I wasn't disturbing the peace, and it isn't slander if it's true. Finally, after an hour of the landlord yelling on his front lawn about the policeman, and at me of course, did his wife come out with the money. She handed the money to the police, of which in turn handed the money to me, and signed off documenting final payment was complete. I sweetly smiled, thanked the police deeply, and went home. I have no idea what ever happened to the landlord, and if he's still pulling stuff like this on others, but I hope that I helped put the fear of God in him and that he just can't screw with people because eventually it will come back and bite him. Sometimes, nice guys, or girls, finish last, but with patience, they finish with a win. Okay, the writer of this story definitely scares me, but it's kind of in a good way. Hey everyone, I hope you all had a really good day and that you enjoyed that video. If you want to check out some other videos, then click on screen right now or check out the playlist down below. If you enjoyed that story, then please do leave a like on it and subscribe if you aren't already, but thank you so much for watching and I will see you very soon.